Hello and welcome to a short clip about the brand new product FTX Trees HD. Just to let you know, I'm not doing a review here. I'm doing a kind of small benchmark because I for myself wanted to know how is it performing. Is it really living up to the claims that they're making? And so I just created two standard situations for you and compared the FPS values and the VAS usages, and here's what I got. So what I did was I created kind of standard situations with a fixed scenario setting, with a fixed airplane setting, and I created two scenarios. The first one you can see here, which is a takeoff in flight Tampa, Vienna, with the Aerosoft A320, and it's with the graphical settings for my long haul flights, so details are a little bit reduced. And I created 3 points where I measured the frames per second and the VAS usage, and I did it with no FTX Trees HD and with FTX Trees HD. So here you can see takeoff in Vienna with an average of 26 frames per second and a VAS usage of 2.45 gigabytes. The second point that I measured was at the end of the runway. So you will see that switch in a second. And here we go, end of the runway, 20 frames per second and 2.48 gigabytes of VAS usage. So I repeated these flights always with no FTX Trees HD and FTX Trees HD. And I used a standard date, a standard time of the day, and a standard weather situation with Opus FSI, and that was building storms. So it should be, you can see some graphical glitches there in the Danube River, but that has nothing to do with FTX Trees HD or whatever. So what I did was I created comparable situations where I could really benchmark for myself how are the two settings performing compared to each other, and of course check on the claim that FTX and ORBX made, and the claim was the following: you will have an increase in frames per second with FTX Trees HD, and you will have no VAS change, no VAS usage change. And that is pretty interesting for us because everyone who does long haul flights with complex add-ons like PMDG planes or Aerosoft airplanes, you will have the problem that if you go from one add-on airport to the other, that you will have a very high VAS usage. So that's could be a kind of a showstopper, and so I try to compare that. And that's also why I have these two dedicated different graphical settings, but I come back to that in 1 minute, because here's the second change. Here we are over the city of Vienna, and we have 15 frames per second and 2.54 gigabytes of VAS usage. Now, why is this so low? I have two dedicated graphical settings, one for long haul flights with big add-on airplanes, and sorry that I have to discontinue that once again. You can see the second situation now. FTX Trees HD activated, and the same situation, and we are here at takeoff with 26 frames per second and a VAS usage of 2.55. So you can see a small increase in frames per second, but also an increase in VAS usage. In fact, it is, if I'm not mistaken, it's 100 megabytes increased VAS usage. So that's doesn't sound much, but in certain situations it can be a problem. So let's take a look how FTX Trees HD performs at the other 2 points. So we'll be at the end of the runway in a minute. So you can see now that we are almost over the end of the runway, that we have just a minute. Yeah, there we go. End of the runway, 25 frames per second and 2.56 gigs of VAS usage. So what can we say so far? We have a pretty decent increase in frame rates because we have, I think with no FTX Trees HD, it was around 20 or 21 at the end of the runway. And with FTX Trees HD, we have an average of 25, which is an increase of like 4 frames per second, and that is a lot. That can or especially at big add-on airports, that is a lot. And I was really surprised that the frames went up so high, because believe me, an average frame rate increase of 3 or 4 frames is a lot in FSX and a lot in Prepared. So, but what bothers me personally is also the increase in VAS usage, which is around 100 megabytes. That's not much. It's not much. I have to agree. But in certain situations, for example, when I went with the PMDG 777 from KSFO to, from Las Vegas to San Francisco, I had around 300 or 400 megabytes left when I landed in San Francisco and when I was parking at the gate. And that's not a lot. And you will, believe me, at such flights with complex add-on airplanes, you will need every 100 megabytes of VAS usage. But, you know, I can live with it, and the graphical impression is a lot better. So we are here at the second point over the city of Vienna. And you can see, and that's really, really interesting, it's 20 frames per second and 2.66 gigabytes. So that is compared to 15 frames per second without FTX Trees HD, and that's a lot over a very, very densely populated city. That's a huge increase in frame rate. So about this increase I can only say wow. And this is also with Fraps running. Keep that in mind. I'm recording this with Fraps, so Fraps is also deducting some frames to it. So let's move on to the VFR setting and let's see how FTX performs there. So here we are at my second standard situation, which is the VFR setting. So as I told you before, I have 2 distinct graphics settings, one for long-haul flights with big add-on airplanes like the PMDG 777 and the Airsoft Airbus, and the second one for, let's say, low and slow VFR flying. So this is the Coronado Bonanza that comes with Prepared, and I did a flight in the middle of Germany. I think the how's the Winzeln-Schramberg, that's the name of the, it's Echo Delta Tango Whiskey, and it's in the middle of Germany, and it has a lot of forest, so it should give us an impression of FTX Trees HD. So we already skipped the first setting, which is the takeoff setting, and you could see the frame rates and the VAS usage. So VAS usage is a little bit lower here in this area, and you can see the frames are already pretty good. We are not at a big city, but what was interesting for me here more than the frames was the VAS usage. So how does that compare? So this is the setting without FTX Trees HD, and we are flying over the forest here. We have a decent frame rate. We have or a very good frame rate, and we have 2.14 gigabytes, so no problems there. It's just for comparison. And if we take a look here outside of the airplane, you can see it's already very, very beautiful. You have the trees here, very dense forests, and yeah, that's the FTX global stuff, and it's pretty much the, I wouldn't say standard, but it's my standard setting. So that's what I was flying with for the last months, and that's what you usually saw in my videos. So we have 2.19 gigabytes here over the forest, and I also did it with the external view so that you can see, because when you change to external view, the VAS usage goes up a little bit because he has to load the external model. and so I did this setting with an external view. And so you have to wait just a few more seconds until we see the settings or the results with FTX Trees HD. And here we are. At the beginning of the runway, you can see we have a frame rate of 59 frames per second and a VAS usage of 2.22 gigabytes, and that means an increase not 100 megabytes but just close to it. So we can see that this is pretty much the same result that we had in Vienna over the city. So it doesn't seem to make any difference if the tree coverage is very dense. So we just have an overall increase of 100 megabytes in VAS usage. And here at the end of the runway, you can see we still have a pretty nice frame rate with 59 frames per second and VAS usage of 2.24, which means an increase of 100 megabytes. Concerning the frame rate, you have to keep in mind that I have Fraps running, and I think that it's somehow capped at that frame rate, but it doesn't matter. With 60 frames per second, you are so fluid that you don't really realize anything more. So you don't need more, in my opinion, but whatever. Your mileage may vary and your opinion may vary, but I think it's pretty good. And so let's take a look at the last setting, or at the last situation that is important for us at over the forest with the external model of the airplane loaded. And let's take a look at this. It just takes a few more seconds, and here we are over the forest, 57 frames per second and 2.27 gigabytes, which means, let me take a look, yeah, just not 100 megabytes but close to it. And you can see I didn't talk about the graphical quality. As always with FTX, it is very nice and it looks awesome. And I think that, to summarize everything, they didn't hold their claim that they wouldn't increase VAS usage, at least not in my system, but I can live with 100 megabytes. And when I take a look at the improvement of the graphical quality, it's way worth, it's worth the money. It's more than worth the money. And so, keep in mind the extreme, or the very high increase in frame rate over a very dense city, and that's pretty cool and awesome, and I can only recommend this product. And if you buy it, I wish you a lot of fun with it. Until we see us the next time, I wish you, as always, happy landings.